Not too long ago, I made the very first entry in my ongoing Project Royal Enfield series where I installed the Stage 2 filter kit by DNA with glowingly positive results. To my surprise, the video, for whatever reason, has done extremely well for my otherwise very small channel, and because of that is where this video comes in. DNA Filters, the company, has seen that video on my classic 350 and have decided to send me a filter for my 2017 Kawasaki Versys 300, as well as a few other goodies in this box. If I'm being honest and blunt, I'm entirely skeptical that swapping the stock filter for this DNA Performance one is going to make much of a difference on the Kawasaki and its very small 300cc engine. The reason I say this is because the Royal Enfield was a Stage 2 kit that swaps out the very restrictive intake cover for one that is vastly larger of an opening. This one here is just a direct filter swap. There's no intake that needs to be installed, anything like that, because the intake is much bigger on this bike. There's really no need for a Stage 2 kit. So the likelihood of having that night and day difference like I did with the Royal Enfield is probably not going to happen, but I'm open to seeing what the actual outcome is like. I haven't seen any video on anyone ever using a DNA filter on their Versys 300, so I may or may not be the first one to make a video on this, which by itself I think is pretty cool. Also, I'm not sponsored by the company. I haven't been paid for this video. It was just kind of like, hey, let us know your thoughts on the thing and make a video on it. And I said, well, yeah, sure, why not? So the box. Yes, well, it came with actually a bunch of stuff, which is really cool. First of which is this book that they sent me about the company and their filters. There's actually a lot of really interesting information in here. It talks heavily about the history of the company, the racers they sponsor, and it goes into detail about the filters. All sorts of really cool stuff in here. And they didn't cheap out on the quality of the pages. I mean, it's all full color, really high quality ink. It's not wafer thin paper either. Then we have a DNA shirt. Nice simple design, little logo on the front with a graphic on the back. Simple yet effective. Yes, they did ask me my size prior to shipping this out, I'm not gonna lie, but I had no clue what the shirt was even going to be. Got a few different keychains that they sent me. Big fan of stuff like this. Every single set of keys that I have has some sort of rubber keychain on them, so this is certainly going to replace a couple old, otherwise ragged ones. They also threw in some stickers and a whole air filter service kit. I think there's enough product in these bottles to clean both the filter on my Royal and my Kawasaki, which is not only awesome in itself, but extremely generous of them to even include this in the first place. Sad thing is that the cap on the oil bottle got a little jostled around during shipping, with a small amount seemed to have leaked out of the bottle, but no big deal. I've had Amazon and FedEx packages delivered to me in far worse condition with far more expensive things inside of them. Last and the most important piece here is the air filter itself. Now, the concept of the filter is really not unlike other performance ones out on the market for bikes and cars, brands like K&M or AEM, for example. I can, however, tell you right off the bat that this filter is far nicer in quality than the original one. The stock filters on the Kawasaki are like the same crap sponge filters that go on certain lawnmowers or even pressure washers. The DNA one here is way higher quality. It looks great, appears to be well manufactured, but whether or not it does anything beneficial to the bike still remains to be seen. DNA claims that the filter will increase the airflow by over 65% while achieving a filtration efficiency of 98 to 99%, which by that alone sounds excellent. So let's go install the thing on the Versys and figure this whole thing out for ourselves. Getting access to the air filter on the Versys is ridiculously easy. All you have to do is pop off the seat. Right by the beginning of the tank is the cover plate for your filter. You have to use a size 3 Phillips as it's the one that fits perfectly. If you don't have a size 3, a 2 will work, but you just have to be extra careful because you're more likely to strip the threads. Once the 3 screws are out, simply take off that cover plate and pull out the filter. It's that simple. Leave the plastic housing around the stock filter. You're not going to need it with the new one. Now, when you have that new DNA filter, you want to use the included red grease and make sure that you lightly coat the black section around the filter that seats inside of the bike. The way you install it is with the foam end facing towards the front of the bike and that flat end also facing up. The bottom end that slides into the bike has that kind of little dip section in the middle. Anyway, when you have that filter installed, just put the cover plate back on and you're done. It's a simple 3-minute job at the worst, and anyone should be able to do this. Also, just tighten the bolts until they're nice and snug. There is no need to use any sort of gorilla strength on the bolts or a torque wrench. It's entirely unnecessary. When you do fire up the bike, you'll notice a slight change in the sound. Not with the exhaust, but with that induction noise where the air is being pulled into the engine. It's a hissing noise that gets louder as you rev. It's very similar to the noise that is made from the exposed performance air intakes that you often see on Harleys and various other cruisers, although nowhere near as loud. A lot of that is because, well, the filter on this bike is enclosed underneath the seat and by my gentleman's sausage. Though this more audible induction sound is nullified the very moment you throw a full face helmet on. The big question, of course, is did the DNA filter make any sort of noticeable changes to the performance of the Kawasaki? The answer to that is a definite yes. Absolutely it has. Now, let's point out that this bike does have a Yoshimura slip-on, so your mileage very well may vary depending on if your bike is stock or whether or not it has any sort of modified parts on it. For me, the change was immediately noticeable the very moment I cracked on the throttle. The acceleration and deceleration were both far smoother. Actually, one thing that annoyed me about this bike was how it constantly felt like it was kind of bogging out while going 10 miles an hour or under, at least without feathering the clutch a bit. Now that kind of bogging, otherwise juddering sensation is gone completely, and low speed operation is now smooth as butter. The biggest change of all was the throttle response. Before, it was somewhat choppy, maybe even laggy at times, as if there was no difference between twisting the throttle at, say, 30 to 40% or, I don't know, 70 to 80%. With the DNA filter, that is all almost 100% gone. The throttle response is absolutely amazing now. Any little adjustment I make to the throttle, the bike immediately acts on it. There's no weird lag, no bizarre dead spots in the throttle. It's all as perfect as I could ever ask for. Now, I don't think this is any sort of wishful thinking. The Versys definitely feels torquier on the low end. The first 3 gears in particular, I noticed an improvement to that torque and just the overall power of the motorcycle. It caught me way off guard. I had become so accustomed to this bike after owning it for a handful of years now that I now have to be more careful while riding, since damn near every time I look down at my speedometer, I'm going far faster than I realized or intended. There's a noticeable change in the smoothness of how the bike accelerates throughout the RPM range. It's one of those situations that is easier to feel for yourself rather than to explain to someone verbally through a video. Also, I can say things like this all day long, how it feels quicker or torquier, but is it really? Well, my bike is currently outfitted with bags and the engine guard, so there is more weight on the bike than a stock one, and of course with the bags comes an increase in drag, obviously affecting acceleration to some degree. And to be completely 100% fair, we have to tack on the several surgeries I've undergone with my left foot due to my disease, and with that still being in the process of healing to this day. Shifting is not only much more difficult for me to do than the average rider, but I also have to deal with sharp, random, sudden pains all the time throughout the day, which the footage displayed on your screen at this very moment will show my otherwise unorthodox, potentially slower way of shifting. Now, despite all that, and not having one of those draggy devices to 100% accurately give you solid numbers, I did the best I could to give you guys something. So before the DNA swap, the best I was able to get on video was a 0 to 60 at about 7.3-ish seconds. With that DNA filter swap, did the time change? Is it any better? The answer to that is yes. So I wasn't expecting much from this simple change, as I've mentioned before. Yes, of course, the bike felt faster in my own mind, but once I got the camera involved and reviewed the footage, I knew for sure that yes, there was an improvement. My best 2 0 to 60s that I got on camera, one of which was slightly uphill, I was able to get anywhere from 6.4 to 7 seconds flat. Eventually, whenever I get one of those draggies, I'll make a separate video on a 0 to 60 speed with the stock filter versus the DNA one. Maybe I'll even remove the bags to see if the drag plays any role in the acceleration times, or if it's not significant enough to really matter. Highway travel has never really been particularly difficult on this bike despite its small displacement, but now it's even easier. I don't have to crack on the throttle nearly as much if I'm just trying to maintain my speed. Even at 80 miles an hour, I'm barely having to twist the throttle nearly as much as I did prior to the filter swap. Although, let's keep something in mind, because it's a very big, well-known problem that I've noticed with Kawasaki Z125 Pros, the Z400, Ninja 300s, and this Versys, is that their speedometer numbers are never accurate. They're always reading optimistically high numbers. In the case of my Versys, if it shows that I'm going 80, I'm really going maybe 77. I know other manufacturers have this same issue for God knows what reason, especially with brands like Benelli and even Honda, believe it or not. People are probably wondering if the air filter did anything to my mile per gallon. Well, the short answer is not really. It's pretty well around the same as it's always been, fluctuating from mid-40s to low 60s. But the problem with me with mile per gallon ratings on motorcycles is that they tend to vary in numbers that are much more significant than what you would normally get with cars. That's why whenever I make videos on bikes, mile per gallon is not something I normally touch on much, if ever. So in the end, is the DNA filter worth it on the Kawasaki Versys 300? I would absolutely say yes, 100%. The massive change to the throttle response and how much smoother the bike behaves alone, to me, is worth that $75 price tag easily. Now, the benefit of the bike having any sort of noticeable increase in torque is a surprise, and an added bonus for me. Depending on how you ride, you very well could see an improvement to your mile per gallon, which is never a bad thing, really. It's actually hard for me to come up with any sort of complaint with this product. Not because they sent me this, hell, I'm a brutally honest, upfront person. If your product sucks, I'm going to tell you that, and sometimes it's going to be quite harsh criticism. Anyone who follows my video game content knows that firsthand, or even some of the complaints I've said with the Janus motorcycles in the past, which, yes, I still want to make a full-length review for the Griffin. Janus, please send me one. Richard, someone, anyone? No? Alright. Anyway, yes, a huge thank you to the DNA team. Whenever I do get a Royal Enfield Scram, I'll be sure to grab one of those Stage 2 kits for that bike from you guys and do a video on the experience with that change as well. So again, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I will see you next time.